think it was like 5% of the network controls 85% of the capacity in the network, which means that there's a reason that it's allocated that way. It's not because of centralization, it's because that's where the capacity is needed. Capital management or routing or node management in general is about moving liquidity around, which means that it's not a job that developers should have to do. It should be a job that a business controller or some people working with finance does. Making the LSP spec makes it so that more services can flourish around it, more businesses can operate and innovate around this. My biggest fear is that the day Call of Duty adds support for paying with Lightning for the latest, greatest skin or type of whatever gadget they're selling, when that day comes, and if most of the large wallet providers and the network can't handle that traffic, then people feel like, oh, Lightning doesn't work.
Henrik Skogstrøm is the CEO of LN Capital, which is soon rebranding to Torq, the name of their Lightning node management software. In our conversation, we explored the current state of Lightning Network ecosystem metrics. We talked about all the new features being added to Torq V1. We discussed why Lightning companies are all working together on an LSP spec, and much more. If you enjoyed this episode and if you learned something new, the best way you can show your support is by sending in sats over the Lightning Network. You can use any Podcasting 2.0 app to do that. There are dozens of them out there, but my favorite one to use is Fountain. Before we get into today's show, just a quick message from our sponsors. Today's show is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the premier provider of Bitcoin and Lightning node infrastructure. Today's show is also sponsored by Stackwork. And Stackwork is a Lightning-powered transcription tool that takes the best of AIs and humans to create better, faster, and less expensive transcripts. We'll have more from Voltage and Stackwork later in the show. Henrik, welcome back to the show. You were on episode 47 a little over a year ago now. Some listeners will remember your episode. Newer listeners may not. So for those who have not heard of you or LN Capital, can you just give a quick highlight, quick background on yourself and LN Capital?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Henrik Skogstrøm. I'm the founder and CEO of LN Capital. We're actually rebranding to Torq right now, so we're in the process of doing that. We build a software also called Torq, which is a node management system for large companies, large enterprises running multiple nodes, large operations with Lightning nodes. So typically something like LN Market, Bolts, OpenNode, IBEX, and these sort of companies.
Very cool. Now, it's been, again, about a year since we last spoke. What have you been working on in that time frame? What can you speak to some of the progress you've seen at LN Capital and now at Torq?
So a lot has happened in the last year. We originally started focusing on routing nodes and built out a tool there, and our tool is still the most advanced in that part of the industry, but we have focused more and more on these large enterprise users, and we have essentially built out support for managing multiple nodes seamlessly as if they were one, and also have the ability to work with both CLN and LND. And all this together with the added automation system or decision engines that we've made it's been a huge amount of work, but it's now becoming to the point where we are the most advanced and powerful node automation system in the world. So it's been a crazy year, for sure. Yeah.
Why the focus on folks who are running multiple nodes? Is this something you think is going to be becoming more common in the future, that businesses and kind of different organizations in the Lightning space may be running many nodes and not just one?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So we see this with all large companies, that they have at least 2 nodes, and many have more, so 4 or 6 nodes. And some of the reasons for it is redundancy. So if one of their nodes goes down, the other can pick it up. But they also have special functions for their nodes. So sometimes they have nodes that only send or primarily send payments, and some that primarily receive. And some also have nodes that have different special functions doing certain types of payments or just payments for certain types of their services, for example. So that's one of the reasons why we have that. So the 4 node setup often is like you have one that sends, one that receives, and then a backup for each of them.
And you expect that 4 nodes will probably be like the full set of nodes that any large company will ever require? Or do you anticipate, when you think about data centers for companies like Facebook and Google, they may have many of them all over the world and just kind of continue to grow in size?
Yes, it depends. Like this is not 100% clear yet, but I think there's always going to be multiple nodes, and as the organization grows, I see there the possibility of being many nodes. Also, like the redundancy part, we see a lot of companies are adding CLN in addition to LND, or LND in addition to CLN. So that's another aspect of it, where they either need the 2 or 3 different implementations because of the properties they have, or because of the extra redundancy, like handling the bug that we saw in LND a while back.
Right. I see the point about redundancy, but one thing I'm trying to understand is what's the purpose of having like a sending and receiving node, like a separate node for each function? Is that like an accounting thing for some of these companies?
So it's often is about that they have one public node that they get a lot of inbound open channel opens to. That results in a ton of inbound capacity. And these nodes often also work as a routing node where they allow traffic to flow around there. But when they send payments out, they want to make sure that that sort of activity is very, very predictable and very stable. So what they do is they have a private node, or a node that isn't really announced, with a lot of really large channels to certain destinations that they know they're sending a lot to. So that results in very predictable, reliable payments sent out through those channels, while they have a large network on the other node.
I see. Now, this is a good lead into my next question. I've been looking at kind of Lightning Network metrics for a while. And in the last couple of months, I've been noticing some trends and again, these are the public-facing Lightning metrics that everyone loves to use that may not be perfect indicators. In fact, they probably have a lot of noise in them. I'm talking about public capacity, number of public channels, number of nodes on the network. I've noticed that nodes seem to be roughly flat, maybe growing a little bit. The number of channels seems to be declining, and this has probably been true for the last 6 months or so. And then the public capacity on the network has seen a couple of sharp drops in the last couple of weeks. And so, I think there's a lot of theories floating around about why that is. River, I know, announced that they kind of closed a few channels. That led to some of the public capacity drop. But more broadly, I'd love to get your take on the state of the Lightning ecosystem and some of these metrics, and whether or not they line up with what you're seeing.
Yeah. So it's essentially very easy to think sort of doom and gloom and see the network going sort of reducing. But the effect is that we've seen for a long time is that the average channel size is increasing, but the number of channels go down. Also, when you look at the capacity going down, I think it's a sign that capacity is becoming more and more efficiently used. Also, we see, of course, some of the routing nodes, the smaller size routing nodes, dropping off because it's too much work or too risky for them to operate versus the reward they get. So that's sort of contributing a bit to that. And also larger operators accepting sort of limiting channels to higher and higher, sort of larger and larger channels. So there is sort of a mix of effects there. When it comes to these large channel count drops that we've seen recently from River and others, River confirmed that it was sort of a cleanup of channels. While I think that is true for a lot of these others as well, where they finally starting to get a bit more insight into what's going on with their node. And so is then able to choose channels to close and to identify either zombie channels or channels that just aren't really active and not contributing versus where the capacity is.
I see. Now, in the previous point you made about, companies may want to open up private channels, unannounced, kind of like, is that a bigger contributor to the Lightning ecosystem today than it was when we last spoke a little over a year ago?
I think so, yeah. So I think that most of the large companies have, especially in capacity, they have a lot of capacity in private channels. So those going directly between, something like probably Bolts and Breeze and other markets and River and all kinds of combinations. For example, Ibex has a lot of private channels, and I suspect, and OpenNode as well. So
Do
it's
you
very
think,
common.
is there a way to make an educated guess? I mean, from your point of view, having a little more insight than the average person into, the inner workings of the Lightning Network, can you make an educated guess as to how much capacity is held in these private channels?
No, sorry. I really have no idea on the ratio between the private and the public channels. That's very hard, but can't really say anything direct.
Okay, I'll slightly rephrase it.
Yeah.
If I offered you a bet that there was more, if I said there's 5,000 Bitcoin in public capacity, and I said there's 5,000 Bitcoin in private capacity, and you have to pick over or under on the private, which one are you picking?
It's actually a really tough question. First, I thought it was obvious to be the public, but there are non-custodial operators who have a very large amount of private channels to different users. And also there are large capacity channels between these large operators directly. So yeah, it could be that it's about 50-50, but I have no idea.
Yeah, that's fair.
I would maybe take the bet that it's on the public side.
Okay. Now, when you're seeing companies like River having decided to clean up some of their channels in the public space, do you think that is also happening on the private side as well, or are people cleaning up public channels to open new private channels?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how much private channels are used in sort of the smaller nodes that are running on their own hardware, like Umbrels and these. No insight into that part of it.
Mm. And are there any other, beyond these three metrics that are so commonly cited, and they seem to be like, to anyone kind of like casually observing the Lightning space, those are the first three metrics they check. And if any one of those metrics change, they their ears perk up and they go, whoa, what's wrong with Lightning, or what's happening? Are there any other activity metrics that either you're tracking or that you think provide a better signal into the adoption, the actual usage we're seeing on the Lightning Network?
So yeah, there's a few bit more subtle ones. So one is actually seeing the average channel size increasing. That's in my head a good sign, because it means that the liquidity is being more efficiently used and there is increased usage in that larger and larger payments are going through. And also you can see I think it was like 5% of the network controls 85% of the capacity in the network, which means that there's a reason that it's allocated that way. It's not because of centralization. It's because that's where the capacity is needed. So that shows when we see that part of it growing, we see that pie, more capacity being allocated to the large operators, we see that the usage of Lightning is increasing. So a simple way of saying it is, if you're a private individual, you don't need $20,000 on a node. But if you're a large company, you might need $1 million on a node. And that makes up why we have these why the distribution is the way it is.
I see. So is it correct then that the companies that are seeing a need for more capital on the network are the ones that maybe have supporting businesses like let's say Bitrefill, or like a River or a Stacker News, or someone who is like has a reason for that capital other than routing payments on the network, and they're kind of like drawing in more capital away from some of the kind of smaller hobbyist node operators?
Exactly. And hobbyist routing operators, there's very few of those who can put $1 million on the routing node. So again, like even if you're a semi-large routing node, there's few of them who have more than $200,000 in capacity, especially off their own money in there. Yeah, so these large companies are who have some sort of activity, like they are a payment processor or they're a wallet, or LSPs are actually increasing, where you see the mix between an LSP and a routing node is increasing as well. So those are the categories that make up the bulk of the capacity and the increase in there.
Mm-hmm. And what's the, I may have asked you this last year when we spoke, but I'd love to get your take on the future of hobbyist node operations, whether or not there's anything there that, an individual can participate in. Is this something that is kind of like, it was once kind of like believed to be possible and is now kind of like fading away as we see more enterprises take up a larger portion of Lightning liquidity, or is there a future here for someone who wants to just try out running a Lightning node with a little bit of capital they may have?
Oh yeah, there's absolutely a future for it, and I think this is a category we're going to see a huge growth in as well in the next bull run. So there. Yeah, I think we're going to see more of that, especially a bit more specialized around communities, areas where you really need Lightning for the ability to pay, or different use cases like that. And also, if you're a small node operator, you can still manage a node really effectively. So if you have some Bitcoin and you want to earn some interest on that Bitcoin, you can do it. But of course, it's not free money out there. You got to work. You got to become good at what you do. So Cobb, for example, he's running one of the larger routing nodes in this industry. He earns quite a good chunk of money on running that node very efficiently.
Who is that?
Cobb. Sorry, Cobb is on our team. He runs a node All Nice, which is one of the larger ones, and he does that all through Torq as well.
Very cool. Okay, let's get into Torq, because I think when we spoke a year ago, you had just started building it out and you were kind of in this beta phase. Now you've recently released Torq V1. Can you give a high level of what Torq V1 is and what changes you've made to the product since then?
Yeah. So when we spoke last time, we barely had like some ability to see routing activity and forwards. So that's thinking back then, the application was, I think, as you should launch them, embarrassing. but we come a really long way. So the application today, the V1 release was about adding a ton more actions to the automation flow, and the whole automation flow that we've called sort of automation workflows. You can look at that as a advanced decision engine, where you, as a company or a routing node, you can decide that if this channel hasn't seen this much activity and in X amount of time, we want to close it. We want to change the fee if the balance is below this or above this point, and we want to rebalance it if we see this sort of behavior or these limits. And the reason that we built it in that way is that the possibilities and the reasons for making this decision is sort of endless. It's a business decision. So we wanted a system that was easy to use, but still had that power. So it's essentially set up as a UI where you can drag elements around, connect them, essentially visually programming a flow. And that works in this case because we're not trying to build an entire programming language. We're trying to build a system for solving domain-specific problems within the node management space. So the V1 release really added more functionality to it to make that more fleshed out. But that part of the software is just ever-working thing, ever increasing in features.
Right. So when you say it's a visual workflow, when you say those words, it makes me think of something like Zapier or Make. Have you ever seen those? Those like no-code tools that allow you to like connect if something happens on Twitter, then trigger an email or something like that. So it's entirely no code. Is that the goal, to kind of build out a tool set that anyone can use regardless of their technical expertise?
Yes, so you should know how Lightning works to use it. That's sort of a bit of a preliminary, not on the technical level, but understand sort of what fee changes mean and what the rebalance mean, or what closing and opening channel mean. But other than that, yeah, it's built to be usable by non-technical people, because I believe that capital management or routing or node management in general is about moving liquidity around, which means that it's not a job that developers should have to do. It should be a job that a business controller or some people working with finance does. So that's sort of where that part of the UI comes from. But that being said, we're working on the complete sort of API integration part, where you can interact with Torq completely via APIs as well. So this is not meant to be a only visual tool, but it is meant to be the sort of command center control tower for your Lightning operation.
Right. And so when you're talking about some of these, sets of like programming logic that you can put into your node, you can say like, I have 1,000 channels, and if one of them has not been used in 30 days, then I'm going to close it. Unless it has over a certain amount of capacity, or unless it's connected to one of these 5, exchanges or something like that. Is that the gist of it?
Exactly. So a typical flow is you have triggers. So you say every 10 minutes, or when a channel balance changes, I want to grab all my channels and I want to filter them. I want to filter them based on the capacity in the channel, the local capacity. So if that's under 10%, I want to use that as a source for rebalance. And then I want to grab all my channels again, filter them based on there being really full channel, like 90% local capacity. And then you pass that into the same action, which is rebalance. And then you rebalance based on that.
Very cool.
You can also do that with fee, for example. If it's below X amount of local capacity, then you want to increase the fee in order to stop incentivizing routing on that channel.
Yeah. And so do you expect then, does this lower the amount of time someone needs to commit to running a node? Because historically, this has always been a very time-consuming task. Or is setting up all these automations and workflows, is this just going to like further increase the complexity of running a node? And sure, you can automate it, but now you have all these different triggers and things like that to worry about.
Yeah, no, so it's of course the other way around. Like, it sounds more complicated, I guess, when I explain it than it is when you've used it a few times. And so one thing is that instead of using tools where you go into config variables, or you actually physically program a new thing into the tool to change behavior, you can here just adjust some parameters or connect another action into the flow. That's one part of it. The other is that node management is a field that it's very hard to build, and it's very, very time consuming to build node management tools. So below all the sort of fancy UI, there's a very advanced backend that handles a lot of the complexity around automation and around grabbing all the channels. So let's say you have 1,000 channels. If you try to ask your node for 1,000 channels, that's heavy. If you try to ask that node for 1,000 channels 5 times in a second, that's going to kill your node. So that's where our solution is built up to have very efficient caching, very efficient storage of all this data in database in a way that makes it possible to run these automations over and over again. We can actually, on every channel balance change on a really large node like the one Kobe is running, all nice, we can react to each of those changes over and over again and adjust the fee. And that would just not be possible if we haven't spent so much time building the backend in the way we did it.
I see. Now, one other thing you're introducing here in Torq V1 is an LSP spec. You're integrating that, I believe. Can you talk to me a bit about what the LSP spec is and why is that important?
So we're actually working on improving that part of the feature as well right now, and it will be released a bit later in August. So the first version of it is essentially just being able to request channels from other LSPs. And this is something we're expanding upon, and I can go deeper into this a bit later, but it's a feature where we're using the LSP spec. The LSP spec is just a standardized way of how nodes communicate to request or sell channels, so that you can have any provider. So I can buy a channel from DZ, from Bolts when they choose to offer that, from any sort of operator offering channels. So for example, I think Breeze also is working on following this spec, and that makes it so that it's much easier to switch between providers of liquidity.
Right. How is a decision made on who that liquidity service provider should be? If I'm going to this LSP spec and I'm saying I want a channel, how am I deciding who to pick from?
So that's something that's also evolving. Right now we can only choose DZ actually, because that version of the spec only he had implemented. But in the next release, there's going to be a lot more choices around it, and it's going to be a lot smarter. And this is something I think we'll see the market evolve a lot on. We've just started on the LSP part of the industry, in my opinion. We see routing nodes, we see all kinds of other businesses piling in and seeing that their liquidity and their connection in the network is actually really valuable, so that they can use that to sell channels inbound to other who needs it.
Why was this standardization necessary? Like, who was the first to kind of say, hey, this is a problem, we need to fix this?
So that's actually Synonym, John Carvalho and his team there. I think they defined that LSP spec group, and they worked on that with a lot of other companies in the industry. And the reason that it's necessary is that, imagine chat today. You have a million different chat applications, and what they do under the hood is actually very, very similar. It's like small data object saying like, here's the message, this is who it's for. Basically that's it almost. And it could have been a spec. It could have been like email. Email has like a spec or a protocol that shows this is how you send email, and everybody agrees on it. But chat never got there, and most likely because a lot of vendors wanted lock-in, they wanted all kinds of different effects that at that point started to become important. And I think with Lightning, it's very important to start thinking consciously about the choices we make now and how that looks further down the road. Because making the LSP spec makes it so that more services can flourish around it, more businesses can operate and innovate around this than it would have been possible if somebody just first built their solution, and then another company builds their solution, and then everything is just this custom setup that everybody has a hard time following and using. So it increases the usability of Lightning itself. And that actually sort of it plays into something else that I think is really important. The more we can define sensible specs and sensible security defaults that are very hard to avoid, especially on the security issues and privacy issues, the better Lightning is going to be. So we should really try to make these sort of standards together when we can, to avoid something like the missing chat protocol that we have in the internet today.
Do you think that we will see vendors or maybe merchants or liquidity service providers decide to not implement the spec and try to lock in their users, their customers, just like how some of these chat apps have ignored this kind of like idea of standardizing on email and kind of built their own system?
Definitely, there's going to be people trying anything, right? But I think I think this is why it's important it happens early and now, because I think the effect is much greater when somebody has built a huge network effect and locked everybody in, and then somebody proposes like a competing open solution. Then it's much harder than if we from the get-go build this standardized solution. Everybody agrees that the world is better when we use this agreed upon solution, and you can win the market in other ways. There's other network effects, there's other product modes, and you can have both. Right. Have a good spec and a good product.
Can you outline the business use case for someone who's considering being a liquidity service provider for them to join in and collaborate on this LSP spec effort, from a business perspective? Because I get the kind of like altruistic side of like, let's all work together, build this spec, and have it so that we can all interoperate. But from a business standpoint, telling someone they're not going to be able to lock in, certain customers or certain liquidity or something like that, what's your pitch to that business?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's about running your business well and having liquidity be predictable. So you can actually talk about service level agreements with certain companies that use your liquidity. So for example, a wallet who doesn't provide their own liquidity to their self-custodial clients, but uses your service. And there you can guarantee that you have liquidity available when it's needed, and that you have a reliable service. Your nodes aren't going down all the time. You can also have a branding effect in that people trust you, and there's also geographic effects that people trust the geography that you're working in. So there's a lot of effects around there where you can build really good products around the LSP spec. And of course, the upside is that you actually have a bigger market, because you don't have to grow the entire market. You don't have to push the entire world on your protocol or your way of doing things. So you grow with the industry.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Just a quick message from our sponsor, Voltage. Voltage empowers engineers to integrate Bitcoin and Lightning Network payments into their business stack with an enterprise-grade experience. The team at Voltage is building the complete tool set so that you can do more than simply spin up nodes, but also understand and interpret your node's data. Their new product, Surge, gives engineers the capability to quickly solve problems and optimize operations. With node insights and visibility through time series data, you get dynamic and complex insights never available before. You can get complete control with insanely fast onboarding, advanced client-side encryption, and zero management infrastructure, making backups, networking, and upgrades simple. Get a free 7-day trial today at voltage.cloud. Do you anticipate that there will be any kind of second-order improvements to the Lightning Network itself from a lot of companies choosing to adopt this LSP spec? One, for example, could be payment reliability. Are there any kind of like other effects that could come from now everyone's working on this standardized system, liquidity is kind of easier to move around the network, and here are all the different benefits that we're going to get from it?
I mean, I think there on aggregate is a ton of these things interacting and evolving the industry in ways we can't really predict, in actually very positive ways. For the LSP spec, in a way, it's a very simple and small part of the overall picture. But I think it can really power the self-custodial wallet providers and make Lightning available to a lot larger audience in countries where they don't have the same access to payment infrastructures, or where other providers in the US aren't allowed to offer services, for example. And in these cases, LSPs can come in and help these users.
Why is this not part of the actual Lightning Network protocol? Why is this a separate LSP spec?
Well, there's benefits and drawbacks to having things be part of one spec. And every time you add something to a spec or a protocol or Lightning implementations, you add complexity and you add more stuff that needs to be considered and maintained. So if it doesn't need to and is not crucial, it shouldn't be. And I think LSP is one of those things that are makes sense to have an optional spec and protocol on. Not sure how to explain it. There's certain things that are just better suited to be outside of the Lightning protocol.
Right. Are there any other concepts or kind of like pieces of the Lightning ecosystem that you think deserve standardization, whether at the Lightning protocol level or as their own spec?
Good question. Yes. Nothing comes to mind right away, but I know there is a lot different there. So, L402, for example, how you interact with payment gateways, as you can have APIs that return 402, which is an error message saying payment required. Then there could be a spec, or there is a spec developed, I think, already that essentially says how that looks like and how you should respond. So when you receive that message, if your node or your software that you're using recognizes it, it can pay immediately. So an example is if you go to some website, newspaper, and you click on an article and you have to pay for it, then you can have given it a budget. Like New York Times, I want to spend maximum of $7 a week. So when you get that message back, the machine or your wallet just says, oh, I recognize this and I have enough budget. So bam, I'm just paying to do that.
And now, is that an instance of a standard that should be implemented across all kind of nodes on the network, all implementations? Or is this something that it's okay if some choose to adopt it and some don't? Because I imagine there could be quite a different user experience for someone who may be using this L402 spec and someone who may not be.
I think here it comes in that in Lightning you have feature flags and you have optional features. So Lightning is to a bigger degree a protocol where you can choose to support certain things. So you can essentially signal to the world that my node understand this protocol or this spec. But yeah, again, this I'm not really deep into that part of development or the so yeah, take my answers there with a grain of salt. But yeah, Fetty and some others organized recently the AI to AI AI for all hackathon, where they had machine to machine payments as one of the use cases, where an AI can buy a service from another AI or an API somewhere. So if they want to order a appointment to something or ask a different machine to train data for them, they can do that autonomously with a Lightning budget and just pay using 402.
Right. Okay, I want to get into some of the other features of Torq V1. There was one that stuck out in your kind of tweet outlining some of the features. HTLC firewalls. I have no idea what these are. Can you give me a breakdown of how those work and why they're important?
Yeah. So it's sometimes like there's an implementation of this that is open source that's called Circuit Breaker. And what it does is that you listen for HTLCs, which are something that's created when you forward or accept payments, etc. And especially in forward, you can, with this feature, limit how much money is pending in your channels or how much money is transferred through. And you can even block all kinds of forwards by just activating the instant block in this workflow. And the reason for that is it's quite important to think about related to what's happening in the network at that certain time when you use this. So you can have a general guard against racking up too many pending transactions or racking up a lot of pending amounts of Satoshis pending in the channels. So the reason for this is that if you have 400 payments pending in one of your channels, and then that channel has to force close, then you have 400 on-chain transactions going on at that point, which can be very expensive if the fee is 1,000 ppm, 1,000 sat per vbyte, right? So that's an extreme example, of course, but this is something that's also been talked about as potential attack vectors against nodes, where, could be beneficial to protect against it. There are upsides and downsides, and there is a sort of a cost to the network if everybody implements very strict HTLC firewalls. But yeah, it's a bit more technical topic that could be a bit of a rabbit hole to go down. Right.
What is the kind of cost there in that example you gave? If you have 400 pending transactions, 1,000 sats per vbyte, what does that actually? What's that number come out to? Like, are we talking in dollar terms? How much money could someone be at risk of losing?
I don't know. It could be quite a bit, but also the example is a bit extreme. But it depends entirely on the block fee at that time, the sat per vbyte fee. Mm-hmm. So if that is really high, then of course it can be very, very expensive. So
I see.
yeah.
So this is really just intended to fend off certain attacks that a node operator might face. Is that the idea?
Yes, that's one use case. Yeah, so the attacks is one use case. The other is just accidental force closes during time where there is a high amount of activity and very high on-chain fee, which often can correlate because people then choose to use Lightning more than on-chain when there's really high fees. So with increased activity, there's an increased chance that something has to force close. So that at those times, you can either reduce the amount of HTLCs that you accept as being pending, or you can actually choose to just block all forwarding instantly using the HTLC interceptor, which then, of course, reduces dramatically the amount of force closes that can happen, or reduces probability of them force closing.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Has there been any other feedback that you've gotten from node operators? Now you've been working with them for over a year, building out Torq. Any particular like themes or common pain points, or things that some of these node operators are bringing up that you think the rest of the community should know about?
Well, we have a bunch of features we're working on that is related to our market research in general, right? And should be a bit careful talking too much around that. But yeah, I think when it comes to the industry in general, we're seeing sort of these shifts in how the industry operates, and it's becoming more and more sophisticated. But a lot of them are feeling pains, routing node operators, LSPs, and businesses. So all kinds of operators are feeling pains that we're working on alleviating. And of course, some that we don't, but all the people are working on, like the simplicity of using LSPs, for example.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now when we think about, I guess, not LN Capital anymore, Torq's business overall, where do you see most of your revenue coming from? You mentioned there's a bit of a shift to enterprises, but I'm curious to know about the split between individuals, organizations, enterprises running nodes for their own purposes, or Lightning service providers that are using your software to power the many nodes that they are helping. Where do you see the split of kind of revenue for your business? Are you mostly geared towards people operating nodes for their own purposes or for helping others?
So yeah, we're focusing on enterprises. We have Torq is available for free for small nodes and for a small fee for medium nodes, and then we charge a higher fee for what we call the organization plan and the enterprise plan. And so yeah, the bulk of our business is focusing on the enterprise part of the industry, and that's just how we chose to build the software and where we chose to focus. I think there is also a large portion of the market in the routing nodes and the smaller LSPs, but yeah, we're going to focus on larger LSPs or payment processors, exchanges, wallets, very large merchants that need to operate their own system. That sort of those categories.
Okay, yeah. The reason I'm getting at with that question is just like, we look at the network today and see this 18,000 kind of public nodes. Is it an issue if that centralizes down to 100 really large operators that are handling all the payments for all the millions or billions of people using the Lightning Network? Is that an issue in terms of centralization for Torq?
No, not really. So Lightning, in my mind, is something where when you have a trustless system, that has a cost somewhere. So the cost comes in difficulty of running nodes and usability in different ways. And that is a problem that's being tackled and improved. And you will see sort of people running nodes completely on their own. And having that be simple, either through Umbrel or using a wallet that has an LSP attached to them that you have on your phone, or in any way it's done. In my hand, that's the escape hatch. So when people need to or want to do that, that should be easy. But we have these large companies who take care of payments for companies operating in places where there isn't a need for that strict self-custody. And then if you should force these companies to run everything themselves, that just has a huge cost and actually slows down adoption overall of Lightning. So it's very important to remember when you need that barrier. So that back to the centralization aspect again, it doesn't take too many businesses or people to rack up a large amount of money in the network on certain providers because they offer services to quite a few people. So that gives this image, and people think of that as centralization. But let's say let's say the US bans Lightning and it's completely legal to use. All companies in the US are shut down. What happens is that there are still companies in the rest of the world operating, and they will see increased traffic. In addition, it will become very profitable to become an LSP on a routing node in Europe or other places in the world. And these companies are most likely in some form going to move to other jurisdictions to operate. So this is a bit like China banning mining, where everybody was like, oh, if that happens, Bitcoin is dead. And it's like took 2-3 weeks, and then all the mining was in US or different places. It went incredibly fast. So it's the same effect here. Yeah.
Do you think we'll see similar regulations or someone, maybe not the US specifically, but some country going, this payment network we're not going to allow anyone to participate in our country?
Definitely. Like any new thing out there, especially if there's some important innovation, is being banned by somebody at some point. It's like, I think it was illegal to skateboard in Oslo in Norway at some point. Like whatever people come up with, they want to ban it.
Right. Okay. And so if someone decides we're going to ban Lightning, you figure then that the logical step is then that capital flows to people outside of the particular country or region, and that those, all the payments continue to go through roughly as they were in the past. Like there's no other kind of strong effect on the Lightning Network's reliability or uptime or payment reliability, any of that.
So you could say that if a ton of liquidity disappears from a market, the way the network is connected today is still sort of dispersed enough to working to find routes everywhere. So that's not going to be a problem. What is a bigger problem is the liquidity in the channels, the capacity in the channels, because payments take a bit of time to actually complete. It's a very short amount of time, but that can build up to delays and create increased failures in payment. So payment reliability might temporarily go down. But the counter argument there is that the people running the routing nodes or the sort of the channels, they see that they're good channels where they have a lot of activity. They're just constantly and instantly empty, which means that, oh, how do I prevent that from happening? I increase the fee on that channel. So the cost of routing increases dramatically. And when that happens, other people who has money and have a routing node, they're going to start entering more and putting in more and more capacity to counter that and to earn more money, actually, mainly to earn more money. So you have this self-regulating market because it is a fee market. It is an actual market that responds to these shocks. So not only is existing routing nodes going to enter more liquidity, but other people around the world who has money available is going to see, routing is really interesting business now. They're going to spin up routing nodes, hire experts from other firms, from other people, and enter that market. So it might actually be a positive for other parts in the world if Lightning is banned in some major jurisdiction.
And you figure that demand response in the market that triggers fast enough that for most users, there's not going to be a significant a noticeable difference in the usefulness of the Lightning Network. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's because of the existing nodes around the world. The existing nodes are going to see a huge opportunity to earn more money.
Right.
And in my opinion, one thing there's enough of in the world is money. It's just not distributed the correct way. But yeah, there is a lot of money. if there's money to be made.
Yeah. I want to talk about the addressable market here for Torq, and just thinking about Lightning businesses in general. You've got 18,000 public nodes. I look at that and I think that's your addressable market, right? If you're software for node operators, that's your customer base. Is this a large enough customer base today to support Torq as a sustainable business? I mean, I recognize you're a startup and maybe discussions about profitability and things like that are further down the line, but is this a large enough ecosystem today that you believe a sustainable business can be supported? Or do we need to get more node operators, more capital, more large enterprises willing to pay to run this software for you guys to be able to sustainably operate?
It's more than enough to build a sustainable business today. And I see the growth happening quite dramatically in the next 2 years. So yeah, it's more than enough. I don't want to go too much into strategy or market in specific numbers here, but it is big.
Where do you see this growth coming from this next 2 years that you mentioned? Who are kind of the most likely sources of this growth?
So in the larger segments, it's exchanges. That's a huge segment. LSPs, I think, is going to grow very fast in the next 3 years, 2 years. In consumer, I think a lot of that is going to be aggregated through different providers and different services that provide smaller nodes to individuals. And again, sort of wallets connected to LSPs. So yeah, it's a lot of different ways, and the exact distribution of the growth depends a bit on the products targeting consumers.
Mm-hmm. With Binance and now Coinbase planning a Lightning integration, do you expect that this is the trigger that brings all the other exchanges on board, or is there something else that these other exchanges are maybe waiting for before they pursue kind of a Lightning integration?
So Coinbase and Binance, those are the perfect users for Torq. This is why we're building Torq, to make that easy for them, because their customers don't really care what a Lightning node is or how it works or how they make it work, right? They just want to withdraw money or deposit money fast and cheap. So we built Torq for them to alleviate that whole very time-consuming, unavoidable, and difficult problem of running nodes. So I think us, combined with the fact that these large exchanges are leading the way, or actually they're following Kraken and Bitfinex with Lightning, and combined with the fee, the on-chain fees increasing, especially when we go into the bull market, I think that's going to make all the other exchanges pile in. So hopefully these exchanges prepare before the bull market when the fee is exploding, because it takes a bit of time to set up an operation and integrate Lightning and all that. So they better start.
Right. And so you probably think then that the fees on chain exploding is the biggest catalyst then to driving more exchanges to adopt. Right.
Yeah, it's one of them, but also increased speed in forwarding or not forwarding, but withdrawing and depositing is a positive as well. Sometimes you can have increased cross exchange arbitrage that improves the price on both those exchanges. There's a lot of different benefits. People can use them in a higher degree as on and off ramps. So the exchanges that has Lightning becomes preferable to the users compared to other exchanges. There's a lot of effects there.
Yeah. Okay, I want to do a little bit of a reflection now on the state of the Lightning ecosystem over the last year or so. And just, I'd love to hear your perspective on some of the biggest pain points that have been solved in the last year. We love to, everyone's got something that they want fixed or improved and built on Lightning. And there's a lot of, everyone's working hard trying to bring these changes to the network. What are some of the biggest improvements and changes that we have seen in the last year of all the work that folks have put in across the ecosystem?
Yeah, the last year feels like 10 to me. So it's hard to remember everything that's happened. But yeah, we're making progress towards having more implementations, having Bolt 12, and L&D now working on adding Bolt 12. And that's a very, very important feature in my mind. Splicing is also coming up, where Phoenix Wallet added splicing, and I know others are also working on this. What other developments has there been? There's been a lot, but I don't remember anything past 15 seconds anymore. So
yeah, that's fair enough. What are some of the other developments in the space that you're looking forward to now? If you look the next year or two out, any particular initiatives that you're excited about people taking on, and the changes they may introduce to the Lightning Network?
Yeah, so actually, I almost forgot that I started an initiative called Scaling Lightning, and I'm going to present that both at TabConf now soon and on in El Salvador in November. And the project is about creating a test framework that can be used during development, end-to-end testing, or research purposes to test really production scale or realistic scenarios in different ways. So the framework is set up to be composed of very simple components that together are really powerful. So we could do a whole nother podcast on that topic, basically. But it's quite technical, and it's a project, a tool built for all the companies, Lightning companies out there, the different implementations and researchers to improve Lightning and scale, help Lightning scale. Because my biggest fear is that the day Call of Duty adds support for paying with Lightning for the latest, greatest skin or type of whatever gadget they're selling, when that day comes, and if most of the large wallet providers and the network can't handle that traffic, then people feel like, oh, Lightning doesn't work. And it takes like 4 years for them to try it again, or next hype cycle to try it. And that just should not happen. It doesn't need to happen. So we should focus on building a test tool that is very, very powerful so that companies don't have to build that themselves. Because frankly, nobody wants to hire a full-time test developer if they don't have to.
And is this what companies are doing today? That they have to manually test things themselves and build out like their testing infrastructure kind of from scratch?
Exactly. So we have a testing infrastructure internally that we're about to switch out with the Scaling Lightning project. And before I started the project, I looked at that in trying to refactor it, improve it, add more capabilities to it. And I was like, I need to check what other people have done. And I looked around, and all the other companies that I found open source available testing sets for, they've done basically the same as us. And it was not a good setup. It was a setup where you essentially try to duct tape stuff together to start it up, check if things are available, and then get a ready state before you can run your tests. And the tests were very static in a way, like that. Setting up that environment was static and a bit hard to do reliably. And yeah, for various technical reasons, we found a way to do this by using already existing software that is meant to pull together and set up environments like this instead of having to use TypeScript or something to duct tape a set of nodes together. So the project is still just getting started, but it's usable today. We're talking to Blockstream, Lightning Labs, Chaincode Labs, a bunch of companies, Spiral, and a lot of these different to make sure we're building a software that is usable for them as well as all the companies.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Just a quick message from our sponsor, Stackwork. Stackwork is a Lightning-powered platform for generating high-quality transcripts of all your audio or video content. They combine AI engines and hundreds of human workers all over the world who are paid over the Lightning Network to assemble these transcripts. And that's what lets Stackwork create better, faster, and less expensive transcripts. To see the results for yourself, you can check out my personal website where I host transcripts for all my podcast episodes. If you want to learn more about Stackwork, visit stackwork.com. That is STAK work.com. One other topic I want to dive into is Taproot assets. And I'd love to hear what impact this might have on Torq's business.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity for us. I mean, you basically need to run nodes, and it just increases the traffic on the network. And if like this is just going to increase the usage overall, pull more users and companies into the network. Doesn't really change too much in the requirements of our software, except perhaps needing a few extra features, but all good.
So in general, do you figure that Lightning companies are going to have an easy time integrating Taproot assets? It's not a big change for them, but the potential gain for integrating something like that could be like a multiple fold increase in routing volume or payments or some kind of like money flow metric that the certain business cares about.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, this is if you're the opinion that everything should only be Bitcoin right now, immediately, then of course you might not look favorable upon stablecoins. But there is a world where there is a transition, there is a need for both types of assets and transactions. So, and my belief is that more people are thinking about and using Lightning and will think about and use Lightning as a transport layer for money and value. And if that ends up being dollars exchanged somewhere or being stable coin received somewhere or whatever form that takes, you're still using Lightning for the properties of that Bitcoin and Lightning gives you, other than just the self-custodial or the sovereignty. So yeah, I think just remember that there's more to Bitcoin than sovereignty.
Interesting. Okay, let's jump into some rapid fire questions. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Sure.
Okay. Has there been any great book that you've read maybe in the last year or so? I'm not sure if I asked you this question a year ago. So any recent book that has changed your view of the world?
Layered Money.
Layered Money. Nice. If you could only hold one asset for the next decade and it couldn't be Bitcoin, what asset would it be?
Yeah, I was about to say Bitcoin there. I don't know. Nice to have an apartment, house.
An apartment? Okay.
Usable, yeah.
Yeah. What advice would you like to share? If you could give one piece of advice to Bitcoin builders who are first stepping into building on Lightning, you've now been in the industry for a little while and you're almost like a veteran of Lightning. What's your piece of advice for them?
If they want to work in the industry, run, especially Lightning, run a Lightning node, play around with it, try all kinds of tools. Because when I interview people and when I look for applicants, the more you know about Lightning, the better. That being said, our company is building sort of really close to the most technical parts of Lightning. But still, if you know this industry, you're just so much more likely to. If you're thinking about building a business yourself as a startup, I would try to think outside of just the Bitcoin ethos and just the sort of the properties, the technical properties, and start to look at what do people need help with in this world, where Bitcoin's properties are beneficial, and then sell them on those instead of Bitcoin being the savior of all the things in the world. It's business proposition based on what they actually need in the real world is much more likely to succeed.
I agree. And then finally, who's one builder in the Bitcoin or Lightning ecosystem that you'd like to give a shout out to for doing great work?
Right now, Max Edwards building scaling Lightning projects.
Very cool. Shout out,
He's
Max.
very, very good.
Awesome. And then before you go, where can listeners go to learn more about you and Torq?
After rebrand, torq.co. For now, ln.capital. That's the website. But also follow us on Twitter. Right now, it's ln_capital. And there we post a lot of educational content around Bitcoin Lightning technology. But of course, you can keep up with what's happening with Torq as well there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the time today. Hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
In the last 30 days, you guys have sent in 49,061 sats. That came in from 44 different supporters. Huge shout out to everyone who's been supporting the show. We have a number of comments from the last few days. Let's run through them real quick. I Opt Out says, Ian brings a lot of value on his channel. He deserves more followers. It's at 256 sats. And that is on episode 116 with Ian Major. Keep It Up Kevin came in from Kepford with 1,000 sats. Again on episode 116. Thank you, Kepford. Blockchain Boo said, I agree with this. Very under the radar, referring to a moment in episode 116. And also said, great guest. Ian is very under the radar in the Bitcoin space. Hope Jolts does well, and sent in 5,000 sats. Again, all in episode 116 with Ian Major. If you haven't checked that one out, definitely give it a listen. And I can't wait to see what you guys send in this week.